So I'd like to officially welcome everybody tonight to the RPS Scottish Contemporary and Documentary Group. We have tonight a talk from Tom Astbury. The group had a wee day out in Stirling for the Stirling Photography Festival last year, and we were very lucky enough to meet Tom and his wife at the library at Doon, and Tom had an exhibition up there, and we then went to see a few other exhibitions as part of the photography festival, and we will be going again this year as well because it's a fantastic event. And in fact, the documentary photography awards are going to be in Stirling as well this year. So hopefully everybody that's in Scotland will manage to get along to see that, and maybe even some of the people from England might come up as well. Well worth the visit. It's a month plus of excellent photography stuff. Not be easy for the folk in New Zealand to come and see it, but I'll send photographs back to them so they can see what's going on. And a big welcome to our Kiwi friends who are here today. I'm in Dunedin just now, which is the bottom of New Zealand, visiting my son. And I went to the Dunedin Photographic Society the other night and met some people, and I know there's a few of them coming along today. So, kia ora, as they say down here. Tom, I'll hand over to you, and I shall mute my mic and let you carry on yourself.
Super. Well, thank you for the invitation. And it was great to meet a few of you at the Stirling Photography Festival. Yeah, I'm just one of the volunteers with the festival. And since my retirement, it's one of the kind of fun things that I do close to home. I live very close to Stirling. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm glad you said contemporary and documentary, because a large part of this content maybe doesn't qualify totally as contemporary, although contemporary to me, since it's my lifetime. I thought actually I would just run through my life as a photographer, because I wasn't sure exactly what to major on. And I started as a photographer as a young man, and used cameras in my working life for my whole working life, but mostly film and TV. But still, photography was always what I was kind of really. The other stuff was stuff I did for money, and my heart's still in still photography in my own particular way. So yeah, photography for me, I kind of fell into it after leaving school, when I had an offer from a local photographer in suburban Manchester, where I was brought up. And that was very much a kind of high street commercial photography place. But I'd always, or as soon as I became aware of it as a young photographer, was interested in a more independent style of photography in the mid-70s, through going to one of Paul Hill's early workshops at the Photographer's Place in Derbyshire, where Paul regularly invited all sorts of interesting American and other photographers to run workshops. I got interested in kind of personal project stuff. So this is a picture of Hessel Street in Salford, in Manchester, back in 1976, probably. I was a member, although at the time when this was taken, I was working as a medical photographer at one of the big teaching hospitals at South Manchester. But I was also part of a collective of photographers who met in the basement of the Grassroots bookshop, a very interesting bookshop in central Manchester. And we met weekly and talked about photography, and occasionally put on group shows. And a bunch of us in 76, 77 maybe, or over the winter of 76 into 77, photographed various aspects of Salford, and put on a group show. So this is one of those from my early days, and it's still, I like this sort of photography. Salford and bits of Manchester still have some back-to-backs. I think these no longer exist, but it's just classic Manchester from when I was a kid, and although it slightly records what was there, I was always interested in making things kind of a good photo as well. So detail in the sky, a bit of winter sun, sky's not bled out, all the kind of technical stuff was always important. But since it was just looking at various aspects of Salford, a lot of the photos were slightly more plain, shall we say, but tried to be more than just a record. It's the scenic River Irwell and the footbridge just near Regent Road. In fact, was some of Salford University, and more of it is now on the site, just the other side of that footbridge, for those of you who know any of Manchester, and as well as just landscapes and stuff. I photographed people, so just walking through Peel Park one afternoon, I couldn't not speak to this chap and his lovely greyhounds. So yeah, these are my earlier attempts at, I'd say, just a small project that would be part of a group show. There was a lot of new social housing, most of it tower blocks, but some terraced housing, and the play park areas kind of interested me because they weren't really beautiful green spaces. The brick solid aesthetic continued into the play park. So yeah, that's one of the play areas in the social housing in Salford at the time. This is a wee horrible conversion from what was originally a colour photo. One of the other projects which I never did anything with and didn't exhibit at all. I still have a few of them. I spent a long part of that long hot summer of '76 walking up and down this a linear park area in Manchester. My father worked on huge gasworks, provided most of the northwest with or that part of the northwest with gas. It's where Man City's ground now is, in Collyhurst in Manchester. But between the centre of Manchester and that bit of Manchester, the Rochdale Canal ran, and when they were building this social housing, they also incorporated, rather than fill it in, I mean, the canal wasn't used, they decided to incorporate it into a linear park running through this housing area. It's a bit tattier now. I've been more recently a few years ago, but that summer of '76, it just became the front room for that whole community. The canal was kind of, well, as you can see with the kids, paddling shallow, and so yeah, I have a whole bunch of photos. It was a project that went nowhere, and then I moved to Scotland and kind of abandoned that. So that was my early attempts at more personal photography while I was earning a living, at that time as a medical photographer. I moved to Scotland, worked very briefly for the Forestry Commission as a photographer, and then for another organisation for a few years, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then got sucked into the world of film and TV, and this was my working life for 30 odd years, all over the place, a lot of traveling, and quite fun, although I do like my own company as much as working in teams. It's one of the film industry, or one of the aspects of it that as a still photographer, you don't often kind of have the fun of working in large groups, unless they're kind of clients or people you're trying to photograph or organize. But big teams, I kind of did the fringes of drama, and this was on a TV commercial, but fringes of drama made me realize that wasn't totally something that suited me. I mean, very big teams, there are too many conversations, too many folk, and so I chose to do more kind of documentary and telly, and not to work out of London, and live quietly in Scotland, the family life, and do the work that I could pick up there or came past my door. Though most of it was traveling. I very rarely worked in close to home, and for a while. Probably only 40% of my work was in Scotland, but interesting, and yeah. So that was a fun day when, as you can see, I probably got what I deserved, bent over the camera there. Oh, one of the other things, fun things about, the film industry, that working as a still photographer kind of a wee bit, and now just behind me there is a huge screen, a couple of big lights, things that had the budget. It's nice, and you don't often get that luxury as a still photographer. If you want to simulate a sunny day in a giant building, if you're on the sort of TV commercial or drama that has the budget, you just speak to the Sparks, and there's a team of them just to make night outside into a sunny day inside, and so having big lighting and smoke machines and all the fun toys, you can imaginatively do quite a lot as a camera person in an industry once you've got the budget to do that. But this a picture was one of those, I think, that was for those who met me in Doon Library last year during the photography festival. This is a project that I started when I was thinking about what retirement might look like and what I might enjoy doing, and through a family connection, somebody that were related to a young man who was doing some, although from America, it was bagpipe player, and his first degree at Edinburgh University. He switched and did Gaelic studies and became a fluent Gaelic speaker. And sometime later was doing some postgrad study very locally to me at Stirling University, sponsored by the Gaelic Book Council. Was doing some work on the Gaelic poet, the 18th century Gaelic poet Duncan Ban MacIntyre, and wanted a few photos for a project he was doing. And I was still working, doing lots of telly stuff, but also, just thinking about what I might enjoy doing when I retired. So on the back of having taken some photos, some landscape photos in bits of Highland Perthshire, Duncan Ban MacIntyre, who was born in 1724, died in 1812. He was born not too far from where this photo was taken, just over the hill to the left, in sight of Bendoran, this mountain. One of his most very famous poems was praise of Bendoran, and he wrote a number of poems that he just enjoyed the landscape, although the landscape as it was when he was younger, the landscape that you see now, pretty well denuded, apart from a few in the valley there of trees, was quite alien to the landscape that he enjoyed as a boy. But I enjoyed this project particularly the Gaelic poetry aspect of it, which was a real key to the way that I would photograph stuff, having had a working life, most of which was required to produce outputs, but there was still all moving in a more commercial aesthetic. Just reading in translation, I hasten to add, I'm not a Gaelic speaker, poetry was a way of just seeing the landscape differently. And so this is Bendoran. Praise over all to Bendoran. She rises beneath the radiant beams of the sun in all the magnificent range of mountains around, so shapely, so sheer. And it's a long, I say poem. They were mostly, he didn't write them down. They were written down by somebody else. They were mostly transmitted orally. So they're probably more written as songs than poems. But it was nice to walk in the landscape choose to go on certain days that just fitted the aesthetic of this poems and have the poetry in my head when I was taking pictures. Last year was the 300th anniversary of his birth, and for some celebrations in Edinburgh, somebody that knew I'd done this project a few years ago asked me if I could have a small pop-up exhibition around some of the anniversary events in Edinburgh. So I reprinted a number of the pictures from this project I'd done a year before. The project itself is called Dùthcas. It's a Gaelic word, a kind of multi-purpose Gaelic word, or it has layers of meaning. It's more than homeland. It's a place, a meaningful place, or a place where you come from that has deep roots. It's quite a slightly enigmatic, but a word full of meaning. So Dùthcas, this project, was just an exploration of the landscapes, not illustrating the poems. I just explored the landscape with some of the poems in my head, and so this installation was from the Stirling Photography Festival last year, having printed a selection of the original project for the anniversary. The watermill in Culin were interested in partnering with the photography festival. They have a gallery space. If you're ever in Culin, it's an interesting place to visit, as well as the downstairs bit of the watermill, the old upstairs bit they've made into a lovely gallery space. So it was perfect because the photos, or a lot of the photos, were taken in Glenlochy, which is just around the corner from Culin. Duncan Ban worked briefly for the Breadalbane estate as a very young man, and then during the 45 rebellion, for kind of political and work reasons, made a brief appearance at the Second Battle of Falkirk on the Hanoverian side. I think he ran away and ended up back working as a forester and gamekeeper for the Breadalbanes up in Glenlochy. So to exhibit this kind of project of the landscapes of the poems just around the corner from where he lived and wrote a lot of the poems was kind of interesting. And during the photo festival, I had a photo walk up the valley as well. One of the beautiful things about the opening night of the exhibition, I'd mentioned before that the poems were mostly transmitted orally as songs. A local Gaelic speaker came and sang some of the poems at the opening of the exhibition, which was quite special because I'd not really heard them sung in that way before, other than a couple of them at the anniversary events in Edinburgh. So just hearing the poems that were in my head when I was taking the photos, just in that intimate space at the gallery opening, was lovely. And it's one of the things that we try and do with the Stirling Photography Festival, is make community links. So it's more than about just bringing a bunch of photos and putting them on the wall. These sort of links and building a wee community, or community events around sharing photography is very much part of what we care about. This was the cottage. It may be a slightly kind of modern repaired, and then subsequently ruinous. This was the cottage at the head of Glenlochy, where Duncan Ban lived and worked for a few years as a forester. So it was nice to go up there. It's a long way up the valley. You can only drive partway up the valley. I actually bought a mountain bike when I started photographing this valley, because from the tarmac road end and a locked gate, or generally the gate was locked, only accessible to pedestrians. It was about another 6 or 7 miles into the head of the valley. So I thought, hang on, if I'm going to be walking 15 miles a day, and I chose to go there in turbulent weather, I need a faster way of getting in there. So I did, get a bike and cycle up to the areas I wanted to photograph. So that's just down the road from where he lived. That was the view from the front of his house, which was probably the real kind of inspiration for a number of poems or songs that he wrote. The song for the Misty Corrie of the roving hinds is the dearest corrie of verdant ground. How lovely, loving, sleek, bright, sappy was every floweret, so fragrant to me. And this poem goes on and on, just beautifully talking about well, he was a gamekeeper, so yeah, the young hinds were there because they would be good hunting for the customers of the Earl of Breadalbane, I guess later in the day. But just being there in kind of wet or misty kind of weather with that sort of poetry that was written by a man who lived there and experienced the same ground and the same weather was one of the joys of doing this, and the whole kind of reason for doing it, really. But there's a kind of darker side to it too, because after a few years of living there, the land changes and changes in land use were or reached this part of Highland Perthshire, and a whole way of life changed. So with the introduction of lowland sheep and the people who lived in small villages in this valley, Glenlochy, there were about 3 small villages of people. They were basically kind of cleared, so that the Highland clearances wasn't just the Scottish clearances at the time of when he lived there. So he wrote. He moved to Edinburgh, and when in Edinburgh and subsequently coming back to visit the odd friends he still had or family in that part of the world, he wrote some very sad and very angry poems just about the clearances and the effect it had on that whole Highland lifestyle in the upper part of Perthshire. So you've heard just a few lines of the Misty Corrie. There's a kind of parallel poem he wrote some years later on a visit back to the Glen, lament for the Misty Corrie, a change come on the world it is, that fine beloved Corrie should now be desolated, and so it goes on. So a beautiful kind of tree and shrub covered landscape with spring flowers is just chewed away by this introduction of lowland sheep. And so some of these things, probably made its way into the way that I chose to photograph and print out. I'm a great lover of black and white for all sorts of reasons. It's slightly reductive, and it does away with some of the clutter and the literalness. Very few pictures in projects like this are totally kind of literal. They all suggest kind of meanings, or to me anyway, meanings, and some of the intention of taking them, just how I felt when I was walking in that landscape on that particular day, but also echoing back to the poems or stuff generally, or how one might feel just looking at this landscape destroyed by sheep. This is one of the villages in Glenlochy that I was talking about. I led a photo walk up here during the festival last a year, and this village did have some people living on it into the 19th century, the late 19th century, but not many. It was mostly abandoned, and certainly the people that remained there were not living and working and feeding themselves in the way necessarily that people had in the 18th century or the early part of the 18th century when Duncan Ban was there. But I just found this, apart from the slight kind of sadness of this row of empty cottages, I just found this hilarious for the reason that Duncan Ban found some things hilarious, or chose to write poems looking at the humorous side of things. So he has a fantastic poem that was in my head when I was kind of walking across here, called Song to the Foxes. The foxes have my blessing because of their sheep hunting, and so it goes on. It's a whole poem praising the foxes, and it goes on. The villages and shielings where warmth and cheer were found have no houses, save the ruins, no tillage in the fields. I say this whole kind of cycle of sad, angry poems that he wrote. So yeah, a lot of this were things that I was thinking about taking these photos. And I was also at the same time as working up that glen, going to places locally where cottages were still lived in or still existed in the old style, and just trying to find ways of representing them and a lost lifestyle. So even just close-ups of a heather thatch, photographed in just a slightly singular way of framing it, and a more conventional kind of thatch of reeds. Just looking at water dripping on a wet day, with poems such as Final Farewell. As a very old man, he went back to the glen, back to where he lived as a child, and wrote a poem. Yesterday I was on the moor, grave reflections haunted me. Absent were the well-loved friends that used to roam the waste with me. And it goes on. It's just the saddest, slightly kind of angry poem, just about the destruction of that whole way of life caused by the change of land use by the landowner. So from poetic kind of landscapes, 40 years earlier, soon after I moved to Scotland, I'd worked briefly at as a photographer at the Forestry Commission in Edinburgh, but an opportunity to work with the museum service at Falkirk District Council came up. And one of my jobs, I mean, a number of just regular museum photography, but the particular project that I did for a couple of years was systematically recording the local industries, particularly the iron founding industry. Falkirk in central Scotland was really the centre of iron founding in Scotland for a long time. So I let's say 40 years for tramping about on those wet moors with Gaelic poetry, I kind of sought to photograph the disappearing of a traditional industry. This was taken in 1979, by which time a lot of the foundries were beginning to close. This was in the Carron Company. The Carron Ironworks was established by the River Carron there in the 1760s, was the kind of first of the big ironworks in Scotland, and very much brought the Industrial Revolution to Falkirk. By the 1940s, 1950s, there were 30 odd foundries in Falkirk. Well, probably the end of the Victorian era, there were almost that many. But when I was there by 79, they were beginning to close. The industry was really contracting. This is High Foundry at Carron Company, where it all started in the 1760s. This particular shed is an early 19th century shed. High Foundry. It was a huge workshop designed for very big castings. And before, it was not the time I'd do much post-processing on digital. I'm very much still analog, even when I'm using a digital a camera. It was there on a sunny day, and it was a fairly just plain empty building, but there was lots of dust on the ground. So I spent 5 or 10 minutes with a piece of canvas trying to get enough dust in the air to get that shaft of light, just to suggest some other things and just kind of make it a bit more interesting. But just to maybe, yes, elegize a past or passing industry. So of the space of 2 years, generally only 1 day a week, I had fairly free rein. There were some other researchers doing oral history recording and some historical research into the foundries. I sometimes visited the foundries in their company. Generally, I only visited each foundry for either a day or half a day, so it wasn't as in-depth I would like, but I had the opportunity to go in a lot of the foundries in Falkirk and do some fairly systematic recording. So this is tapping at the furnace, the melt of the molten metal and filling the ladles, which were then kind of transported around the shed. Looking at this now, I shudder at the lack of PPE. I don't think the guy tapping the furnace has even got gloves on. It doesn't bear thinking about. But I just found these things. I liked big industry. My dad worked in the coal gas industry, and the days when gas was made very simply just by heating coal and then just slightly cleaning up the stinky stuff that came off it and distilling tar out of some of the residue and all those other things. So I was used to big smelly industry, having been to work with my dad a few times, and this big industry where stuff is made, I just found so interesting and was aware it was disappearing. So this is Falkirk Iron Company on the banks of the Forth and Clyde Canal. That was the second Falkirk Iron Works was the second foundry opened in Falkirk by some workers from Karen Company who decided just to open their own enterprise in about 1819. This shed probably doesn't date from then, but it's a Victorian shed that was still in use in 79 when this picture was taken, and the working practices of just making a wooden pattern of the object you wanted to make out of metal, pressing it into sand, and closing the sand box with the impressions top and bottom with a wee hole, and then just pouring molten metal into it. Hadn't changed for hundreds of years. I mean, foundries have been making stuff that way, but just such an interesting place to photograph. And it's just another aspect of the same shed. So I was aware when I was taking these that it was to be a document recording what was there, but it's kind of interesting that these two photos are taken probably about 3 paces from each other. They're very, very different, show very different views, different things happening. They're also, although people like to suggest sometimes that documentary photography or record photography is somehow objective, it's entirely subjective. I mean, the photographer has complete control over where the camera is placed, which direction it's pointing, and when you press the shutter. I was that was at the back of my mind, choosing what sort of things to record and how to depict them, and always trying to make the photo just something interesting and worth looking at. I should say the reason why there are a good few of these I'm working with this archive at the moment. When I left that, I simultaneously photographed color slides and in black and white and medium format and eggs. The color slides were accessed since I left in probably 1983. I left there, and a few years ago, when I made some approaches just to access my own archive, just to make some prints and exhibit possibly. I was aware that the medium format negs had never been disturbed since I left in '83. So it's been interesting I do have some old prints made back in the 70s and early 80s when I was there, but it was interesting accessing them and making some big scans and some prints with a carefully chosen a printer who could just replicate the sort of black and white prints I would make if I was motivated to go back in the darkroom and make some, as well as recording what was taking place in these foundries. I was always important to me while I was doing it. I felt a responsibility to show the who worked, to provide evidence for history, to answer the question who worked there. And so this is Mr. McCafferty at a small foundry in Denny in central Scotland, Cumley Bank foundry. Yeah, Mr. McCafferty was a moulder in the foundry in Denny, and so Mr. McCafferty and people like him were the sort of people who worked in those foundries. Although I only visited, well, I was in Cumley Bank foundry, I took some lovely pictures that I liked while I was there. This amongst them, I was only there for one afternoon in 1979, and yeah, it's the interesting thing about being a photographer, passing through people's lives just briefly. Universally, I think, in some of the more difficult and very kind of physical and dirty industrial work in the foundries, I was always treated, I was always welcomed, treated with helpfulness, great kind of warm feeling. I mean, I'm looking back on it now, thinking, "Gosh, am I romanticizing industrial work?" And I'm sure they did have bad days, but as a photographer going in as a visitor for half a day, you'd expect to meet maybe some people who were a bit I didn't want that intrusion, but yeah, I had helpfulness and friendliness wherever I went. It's another foundry down in Bowness, just showing. There's a moulder just ramming the moulding sand down, having made an impression with the pattern of whatever he was going to mould in the box. So just finishing his row of boxes before the hot metal arrives. So yeah, and all this is going. In fact, the last of these really old Victorian era foundries in Falkirk district, where most of this kind of survey that I did took place, went into receivership just towards the end of last year, and so they've all gone. And there were probably still nearly 30 when I started photographing in 79. I've talked about patterns. Yeah, pattern makers who worked with a wood and just built and carved, and all the most ornate ironwork you see was built in wood by chaps like this. So yeah, he had a pattern maker's business working in the iron founding industry in Falkirk, a kind of specialist workshop producing fine patterns. This is Mr. Robert Shaw. I photographed him in 1980. I didn't see him with a chisel and a saw in his hand, but I suspect he might have taken his bonnet off when he was working. I don't think he knew I was coming, so despite the fact he was still working at the bench, although owning the business, he obviously arrived for work in a tweed three-piece suit every day to work at the bench. The fun fact about Mr. Robert Shaw is that as a younger man, in 1925, he attended a public lecture in the Temperance Cafe in Falkirk. The lecture was called Seeing by Wireless, and it was delivered by John Logie Baird. who's credited with the invention of television. Hearts, I think it was called Hearts, a kind of wireless shop where you could go and get your wet batteries charged up and buy early radio equipment from in the 1920s. The workshop there was used by John Logie Baird when he was building the prototype that he was going to demonstrate his practical method of transmitting television at the Royal Society in London. So just a few weeks before the demonstration in London, which is claimed to be the first public demonstration, he actually gave a demonstration in the Temperance Cafe in Falkirk and asked for volunteers. And Robert Shaw tells the story that he volunteered, went into another room, and subsequently appeared on the screen next door in front of the audience. So as well as being a master pattern maker, Robert Shaw claims to have been the first man ever to appear on television in the history of the world. So there we are. We've all got a secret. I'll go through these slightly more quickly. I don't know why. I just love that period of my life, filming these guys. It's the same Cumberly Bank foundry. It was just a lovely, happy little place to work, or at least on the day that I visited and took these pictures of the sort of people who worked there. I mentioned the foundry that closed, or that went into receivership last year, Ballantyne's in Bowness, and this is pouring from a larger ladles into some bigger moulding boxes in Ballantyne's. And just as I said before about recording, I recorded, this is the same activity, same guys. I just did it from a couple of angles, just to try and just provide more, since it was a historical record amongst other things, just to provide some more information and clues to historians following on. I am going to be exhibiting, for those of you in Scotland, this work. I have exhibited bits of it with the Stirling Photography Festival a few years ago, and odd little bits of it elsewhere, but it's never been exhibited in Falkirk, bizarrely. So from May this year, for how long, I don't know, for 2 or 3 months at least, an exhibition of these photos will be in Calendar House in Calendar Park in Falkirk. So for those of you in Scotland, you can come and see the prints in the flesh if you want. Another aspect of floor molding. These guys with the hot metal, it was really important when you're pouring into the mold that the metal just kind of flows, particularly if it's a big flat casting where metal's coming in from 2 different holes, or some of these had 4 holes. And these guys were like ballet dancers, just so they were pouring the same amount of metal at the same time, so it flowed and set perfectly, so there were no kind of floors where it had cracked in. So they don't look like ballet dancers, but they were. I've spoken warmly about Cumberly Bank, and that was the yard at Cumberly Bank. They made a lot of kind of workaday castings. So covers, access covers that you see in the road for kind of drain grids, all those sort of things that they just made hundreds of them over the course of a week. And the dog snoozing in the sunshine. One of the other industries, it's not all going to be industry, I will get onto something else. One of the other industries I photographed that was just such an interesting place to go as a tourist, under Falkirk and bits of North Lanarkshire. There's a really fine fire clay and coal. You can see both in the strata there, coal up to just above the knee of the miner and then up to his helmet, fine fire clay. So refractory brickworks where they made fire bricks for furnace linings, and really high quality refractory bricks were made locally from the clay mined locally, and some of the kilns on the brickworks fired from the coal. So this is Roughcastle Mine, which is roughly where, for those of you who are familiar with central Scotland, where the Falkirk wheel, the kind of canal lifting canal boats from the Forth and Clyde system up to the Union Canal, so you can go between Glasgow and Edinburgh on canals. So the Falkirk wheel, where that is underground from their Roughcastle mine, used to be. So there was only a small group of miners. This was photographed in October '79. It's a small group working underground then, but they produced between them about 20 tons of coal and 95 tons of fire clay a day. And it's an interesting place to go. And I could use my flash. It was no gas problem there. The mine deputy came with me at all times with his lamp, just in case that there were any gas issues. But it was a safe environment. That's another a local mine. There were such interesting places to go as a visitor. They were all, none of them were down in cages. They were all just walking on inclines, some of them multi-level. This was Carbrick mine at Torwood, just near Larbert, for those of you who know central Scotland. And the working seams in this were at least half a mile walk down the hill, the lower of the two entrances you see there. So it was before you'd started work, and even as a photographer, lugging my camera case, a flash and a tripod and stuff underground, half, 3/4 of a mile down that hill was felt like a long way, but coming uphill on the way back, it felt even longer. But I worked hard underground just to try and give people a feeling of what it felt like to be there, and I hope I've achieved some of that. That's back at Roughcastle. That's what you'd see on the way out. It was a longer walk, and Roughcastle was quite a long walk in, so it was always nice on the walk back to see daylight in the distance. The mine worked by just drilling into the faces and putting an explosive charge in. It's a shot firer, just drilling. That's at Carbrick. Mr. Houseck, I think his name was. And that's in another mine in North Lanarkshire. Once you've got explosives in the whole of the face, it wasn't done electrically. It was the old kind of silent film box of dynamite job. There was just a fizzing fuse. So the shot firer at the end of the shift, when everybody else was walking towards the surface, he was last man out. He would light the fuse. He knew how long it was and how quick he had to walk, and then just walked away. And it blew the enough fire clay and coal out for the guys to shovel the next shift down. But kind of interesting to photograph, and something that you probably can't see happening now. One of the things about photographing underground was how to do it and give an impression. So I like to put the camera on a tripod, open the shutter, have my flash gun, and then walk away, so you get a dark foreground and light up the background. This is the fire clay that's been brought down at the just ready for the guys to kind of load into a hutch. But as you can see from the close-up, when I went with the flash gun to do 3 or 4 flashes, I didn't hide well enough. So occasionally they appear as self-portraits. And this map shows the style. It's called room and stoop. So from the entrance, which is the far left, there's a kind of central way that walks all the way down. And then you just excavate in lanes, turning at 90 degrees and this kind of chessboard effect, leaving enough material behind so the whole lot doesn't collapse. And so it's like a maze at the end of the day. Fascinating world, fascinating to go there as a tourist. Roughcastle mine, I enjoyed a number of visits there. Got to know the mine deputy, Joe Prochek, who took me underground a few times. So of course I had to immortalize Joe one day just before we walked underground. And on the way in, there'd been a roof fall, and he was fascinated to show me all the fossils, all the kind of big leaf plants and thing. I was more concerned about whether the roof was safe and whether huge pieces of stuff had come down on us, but he just loved his working environment. And yeah, the mine, Roughcastle mine, where those last couple were taken, closed on the 22nd of December 1980. That was the last underground shift. So these are the guys that produced the 20 tons of coal and 95 tons of fire clay every day of their working lives. And so I was underground. I was privileged to be underground with them on their last working day underground. And they posed for a team photo. I'm not sure I'd be quite so happy on my last day at work, because some of them in 1980, a time when work was not easy to come by for some chaps, yeah, they look quite happy to be leaving work. And that's in the bothy at the end of the shift on the last day. So yeah, these are the sort of chaps who worked in that small mine back in 1980. And yeah, this is a mine you could visit for a short while, just at a Kinneal outside Bowness, at the end of the steam railway for a while, until it was deemed a bit unsafe. You could actually go underground, but it had closed as a productive mine some years before the kind of public access. I was there before public access, just not long after it had closed. But yeah, it was quite quite something to go into. This changing room and the helmets, jackets, boots of the last shift were there. So yeah, it's a photograph of what's not happening rather than what's happening. But yeah, these are the sort of photos that I'm leaving behind for historians to yeah, see what's no longer there. Yeah, brickworks, brick kilns. That's where clay. This is actually a common brickworks, building bricks, but a works called Cannerton, just near Bonnybridge, or rather near Denny in Bonnybridge. Yeah, just outside Bonnybridge on the Kilsyth Road. Used to be. This is one just up the road from there in Dùthcas, fired by coal. So on the roof of the kiln, little firing holes, and this guy's job would keep the home fires burning. There's a chap just at another brickworks emptying fire clay bricks out of the kilns. So yeah, another of those who worked there. And what they do, I'd have to tell you, after a kiln's been fired, when they're taking those bricks out, they're still blisteringly hot. You can see he's got protection on his hands. Even just to be in there taking photos, I could feel my skin just getting quite pink. And at Cannerton Brickworks, where the big kiln was taken, just another of those pictures. Yeah, a lot of women worked in the brickworks, and a lot of the heavy works. These ladies are just emptying a kiln of bricks. She passed me this after I'd taken it. This is a lady called Mary Gordon at Cannerton Works near Bonnybridge. She passed me the brick after I'd taken the photo, and I juggled it because it was so hot. But, she obviously had leather hands by that stage. I mentioned a lot of women worked in. This is a brick's been a brick making machine, so that the wet clay goes in the hopper at the top and gets mixed a bit, and then gets squirted and chopped into bricks. Some smaller runs of fire bricks for small furnace linings and special jobs were molded by hand in these clay molds. This is at a works called Craig End, and fittingly the moulder was called Mr. Maclay. I just as part of my job, recorded a few other passing things. The end of coal mining in a Falkirk district down at Kinneal Pit, just down near Bowness. This was actually connected to a Valleyfield in Fife. The underground tunnels, the two coal mines were connected up. It was a bit political at the time I photographed the outside, because they were planning its closure, and it was around close to the times of mining strikes. So I never got inside or underground in this one, although I have been in coal mines elsewhere. and just within a couple of months of it closing, it was demolished. And the coal mines in central Scotland closed and were demolished far more quickly than even Arthur Scargill had predicted, and was ridiculed for predicting during the disputes. Yeah, paper mills, I recall. These are contact a sheet. I sometimes used the museum that I worked for did have a medium format 645 camera, but my old student camera, twin lens Mamiya, I love to. I sometimes just choose to use that, so that's why the legs are square on this, and that's just one of that's a small paper making machine. Wet pulp goes in one end, and series of all sorts of mesh rollers and dryers and stuff. And paper comes out in a big roll at the others. That's a small one. Some of the big sheds at Carron Grove near Denny, where this was taken, where the Foudrinier machines are quite long. Whiskey's being made in Falkirk again at Rosebank. These are the original still, the stills from the rebuild. I think the 1884 stills. I photographed it before it was mothballed. It was mothballed in 1983. I photographed it before that. There was a chance of opening the distillery again in 2009, but during the Christmas holidays, just before the possible reopening of it, while it was closed for the Christmas holidays, some people broke in and pinched all the stills, just cut them into pieces and removed them, and so it didn't reopen then, although it is currently making whiskey again. Just a few years ago, in fact, on my way to the archive to access some of my negs a few years ago, I drove past it, and the older bits of the distillery had been knocked down, have subsequently been rebuilt, and they're distilling again on that site as the mash tuns in the distillery. A view into a mash tun, and George Aitchison, the warehouseman, leaning on a barrel of spirit with a lit cigarette in his hand. Yeah, back in the day. So yes, just another of those pictures, the sort of people who worked there. A completely different industry, and not in Scotland, but one of my favorite, the sort of people who worked there. He was the owner and manager of the last open pan salt works in the UK, possibly in Europe, I'm not sure. The Lion Salt Works in Cheshire. I just love this guy's just this guy's office. That's Henry Lloyd Thompson, whose family had owned it for a couple of generations. He was the last owner. It's now a museum, but yeah, he's got his shoes drying. The cat's enjoying the stove. But yeah, very, very basic. And in Cheshire, brine is pumped into huge kind of open pans. It's just evaporation then. And the lumper, this is Horace Heath, who was a lumper there, with a little kind of hand sieve thing. He would just collect, as the evaporation went, the crystallized salt into these molds, and they gradually fill all the molds with crystallized salt. But yeah, another industry that's completely gone. I was interested personally to photograph this because my dad was from Cheshire, and his father had worked in salt works. So yeah, it was an interesting thing. I just love these old industries, but it's something that's gone, and that's what's become. Even I was aware at the time all this stuff was going, so that was a reason to photograph it. So that's the past, and what am I doing now? I mean, I've mentioned my involvement with the Stirling Photography Festival, and this, in fact, I think, well, this still may be the header of the website if you go on the Stirling Photography Festival website, and just like if you can remember it, a title slide with the name and we talk. Yeah, I'm still interested, and I do like the sort of weather I enjoyed when I was photographing for the Dùthcas project up in Highland Perthshire. I like turbulent or changeable weather, and there's something about views that are full of history, and this is a view of kind of Stirling and that bit of the although unfortunate, the river isn't quite glinting, but the crossing of the river, which is the reason why Stirling is there, and the kind of strategic bit with the castle on and in Stirling, there was just and this was photographed from a hill fort which probably from at least 2,500 years ago. There was a hill fort there to partially control the access to the Highlands, and the first fordable point of the river from the Forth Estuary was by Stirling. So it's such a strategic a spot. So yeah, being there in that sort of light and printing it in that way, and for me, just calls to mind those layers of history and the significance of the kind of ancient history. It just opens up different feelings about landscape, and so this is the way that I'm still photographing. This is a photograph taken just a few years ago. Murray Cup, the Stirling archaeologist, said of this view, "It's perhaps the most important view in Scottish history. Romans, Angles, Picts, Vikings, Edward I, Edward II, Wallace, Bruce, Cromwell, Bonnie Prince Charlie, and Cumberland all looked at this view and all shed blood and treasure trying to control it." So I had that in mind when I took that photo. So this is the sort of stuff I'm doing now, just going to historic landscapes, not all as big as this, some just details of landscapes with history, and trying to photograph them in interesting ways, in the ways that I choose to, which is in black and white in interesting light. And in black and white in interesting light for family reasons. We spent a few years, and I'm still traveling up and down the Ayrshire coast and to bits of Galloway, and just for reasons of interest and camera, and just to kind of clear your mind a bit. I started photographing some of the small harbours, and this is one, the small harbours on the Ayrshire coast. But at the time I took this, I was reading a book on, I've always been interested in physics since I was at school, on quantum mechanics, and the weird, it's just utterly weird. And I had this, I'd got to these sections of the book I was reading at the time I was taking these photos, that when we look at stuff and think it's solid, and then you get down to the atomic particle level, and it's kind of slightly less solid and kind of interesting, but you can understand the way it works. When you get down to subatomic particles and quantum mechanics, it's even weirder, and even time isn't linear or continuous or in any way recognizable as the linear time. So just watching this happen, and taking photos where, although you understand that physically gravity does work, when you freeze it, is that the same guy? Is he going down, up? All these questions that when you get down to think about quantum mechanics are completely variable and less understood. That's the stuff I sometimes think about when I'm walking through the landscape, and occasionally it breaks through into the pictures I take. Something completely different. I'll just close with a couple of things that are kind of works in progress, whether they'll ever become anything other than just stuff that I witter about to myself and take for family reasons. I go to Spain quite a lot. My son lives in Madrid, in Spain, and the Spanish, I realized on a visit a few years ago to Cadiz, despite the fact Cadiz's got an amazing beach and an amazing Atlantic bit of coastland and hot sunshine, over the back of the promenade, they'd started constructing all sorts of interesting things, including this concrete pool. And I just became fascinated in these constructed landscapes. The fact that when the Atlantic and a beach are about 20 steps away, you would actually conceive and get an architect to design and then build a concrete pool, paint it blue. But apart from a couple of people sitting in the water, in inverted commas, people kind of treated it the way it was constructed. So like a swimming pool, people are sitting at the edges with their feet dangling against the concrete blue stuff. And there's, well, yeah, that guy could be surfing. And these constructed landscapes started interesting me. So I've started as I travel in Spain and notice these things in various places, I've started doing those. I go to Madrid quite a bit, and at least once a year. Well, luckily my grandson's birthday coincides with the opening week in Foto España, so I obviously go for a fortnight to celebrate his birthday. But on the periphery of Madrid, I mean, there's lots and lots of space there. But they're building very posh suburbs of luxury apartments. But as well as building these luxury apartments, what I'm coming to call urban utopias, they're also constructing maybe utopian landscapes to go with them. So you build an apartment and it's more than just a park, that they're building these apartments surrounding completely artificial landscapes. And I just find this A, hilarious, and B, just really, really interesting. So yeah, so Valdefuentes, Barrio Valdefuentes is yeah, just suburbs or just becoming the new suburbs of Madrid, a separate community on its own. Now is having apartments, riverside apartments. Yeah. The landscape, or these constructed landscapes, are quite new. When I visited these, I think these were taken just less than 2 years ago, year and a half ago. So I'm interested to go back to see how these marshlands and constructed riversides age and how people use them. And I'm just back in the 70s when I visited in the summer of 76 the linear park, and was interested to see how the Rochdale Canal had become, in that hot summer, that everybody's front room, and everybody was just out there picnicking and enjoying it. And whether these utopian or attempts at kind of utopian urban living, whether they'll be treated the same. So yeah, these photographs are whether it'll become anything, but at the moment I'm just tentatively on odd visits there, just photographing what's before me, and we'll see how this develops. These kind of rather interesting and sometimes odd constructed landscapes. So that's one of the things that I'm doing at the moment. So yeah, from turbulent weather Scottish examination of history to these kind of hilariously bizarre urban utopias in Spain. This is yeah, Parque Juan Pablo. It's yeah, an attempt to well, formalize a desert landscape. So yeah, I'm interested in those. That's a work in progress, whether it'll go anywhere, but that's one of the things I'm doing at the moment. And yeah, this is kind of where it ends. And if I talk about this project, I'm going to have to do it. I'm not a camera fetishist. I'm much more interested in what happens in front of the camera, or what I choose or where I choose to be to see what's in front of the camera in that place. But some years ago, with a particular project in mind, which I wanted to be a very, very let's call it slow photography, analog. It's a pinhole camera I acquired, which yeah is very pleasing in the hand. I haven't started the project yet, but now that I've spoken about it, I'll have to do it. So yeah, one of my next projects maybe will be a pilgrimage, a slow photography pilgrimage with this pinhole camera. So thank you for listening to that. That's been my photographic journey so far.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much. And one of the things that I picked up on, and maybe you probably already realised this, was you talked about the anger of Duncan Ban MacIntyre and his poetry and how he looked at the land that was getting disappeared by the clearances, and yet your own photographs of the coal mines and of the steel works and all the bits and pieces were exactly the same. Maybe not as angry, but you were photographing things that were disappearing or disappeared. Quite a nice rotundness about that, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I certainly wasn't angry about them disappearing because I mean some of the things that those chaps had to do and the health problems that they ended up with doing them, particularly I just know from my dad in the coal industry, he was an industrial chemist, so he had a fairly clean job, although visiting dirty places. But a lot of the guys who worked at the dirty end of the coal gas industry died very young from all sorts of things. So, yeah, I just found it interesting to go there with a camera, and I mean, as a young photographer in the 70s, two of my well, they're just about contemporaries rather than heroes, but my work was informed by their work. Chris Killip and his name will come back, Daniel Meadows, who I met recently again, which was lovely. Yeah, their work, Chris Killip, just his approach to photography, and particularly the industrial stuff. None of this is answering your question, but the industrial stuff in the mills in Lancashire and other places that Daniel Meadows went, the whole practice of kind of taking worker portraits and things was informed by his work. But yeah, because I was employed by a museum service to record it, I mean, that was really my kind of focus, and try to record it and do it justice and do justice to the people who worked there and make interesting photos that I would be reasonably kind of happy with at the end of the day, which yeah. What I do feel grumpy about is I was taking them because at the time the museum service were hoping to acquire a big industrial site near Falkirk and open an industrial museum. So the recording was part of the planning process for a big industrial museum, and the councillors in Falkirk took, I think most of them are dead, so none of them will sue me if this isn't true, but just took cold feet and didn't make the commitment, although there's a lot of other funding was in place. It could have easily happened, whether it would have survived to now. But I go to places like Beamish and you think, oh, there could have been something. Well, there is one in Scotland, in Summerlee, is it, in Lanarkshire, that an industrial museum, but Falkirk could have had a better one in the places where yeah, iron founding in that industrial way started, and anyway, yeah, so that didn't happen. Yeah, although it's a different world now, and the sort of manufacturing done in that very Victorian way, it probably only still existed because of lack of investment and lack of ambition, and there were probably a whole lot of management reasons why that was still there for me to photograph in the late 70s, early 80s, and why they just kind of closed. And yeah, I don't know where. Half of Westminster, all the ornate metal railings that are there were cast in Ballantines. I don't know where they're going to go for them when they need to replace them now, probably elsewhere in the world. Yeah, none of that answers your question.
But it's, you say it's a different world now, and it is a different world, and that is why it's even more incumbent upon photographers to photograph these kind of things and document them and make them available, and and so that people in generations to come can look back and go, wow, look at the lack of safety, look at how the people worked, looked at there's two below me on this screen. There's another Kiwi, Tony's there, and he's interested in portraiture. And these portraitures you were taking, these social portraits, are not your kind of flashlights and highlights and circular rims and round people's eyes, but they're very real and they're very interesting because you look at the clothes, you look at the hairstyles, you look at the guy with the cigarette in his hand, all these things. The guy that was the first person to be broadcast on television. These are wonderful portraits. There's a warmth and a humanity about them that will last for generations.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I said partly informed by Daniel Meadows' work, and he did some beautiful stuff. I always felt it was important, and I still, I do some volunteer work. Now I'll have to be careful what I say because I'm volunteer staff and bound by their staff contract. But I go to the National Portrait Gallery in Edinburgh to do some volunteer work with the photography collection and in the National Galleries, and you walk past acres of the great and good, and in the contemporary galleries, that it'd be unfair to say that they haven't redressed the balance somewhat, but I've never seen a portrait of a worker put on the wall there yet. So somebody's got to do it, and it's just part of that. I mean, if you're in a factory, well, for me, it was just natural to I say provide evidence for following historians as to answer the question who worked there. So there they are.
Yeah, and these are the people who built these empires that the rich and famous lived off of. So
absolutely,
yeah. Any other questions from the floor for Tom? And I'll.
Yeah, that was really lovely.
Yeah, Dave's enjoyed that. Good. Right, well, what I'll do is I'll
really enjoyed that.
Thank everybody for coming along. I'm going to stop the recording. You don't have to disappear, but I'll stop the recording. A wee pitch for our next one, which is at the end of March, which is a book club night. So that's pick a book and give us some photographs of your book and tell us why you liked it. Thank you very much again to Tom for giving his time this evening or this morning, depending on whereabouts in the world you are at this particular moment. And giving us such a rounded talk from the black and white square format Scottish Dùthcas ones to the more modern format, all very colourful Spanish ones. There was definitely a change in optimism between those, I felt. And in years to come, perhaps people will photograph those lovely colourful scenes that you did in black and white with weeds poking out of the cracks and broken bits of concrete. And all. This is how things tend to go in the modern world, don't they? So I'll thank Tom very much for his conversation, and I shall stop recording now.